Be cutting all the way to about 110. So, and as you can see my little mark there, it's 20 gauge silver. I always do that really lightly mark because as you cut a piece of sheet, sometimes you lose track of what thickness you have. So I also took the liberty of measuring my stone tentatively 110 millimeters. That's a little flexible rule that I put around that Royston turquoise, so I know I'm going to stop about 110 millimeters on this bezel. Also, I'm going to use this thick blade that you see compared to the one on top, which is a normal blade that I use. 4/0 or 4/0 is the thinner one. I use the thicker ones for these bezels to try to emphasize the cut, as you'll see later. And of course, everything here is laid out in the metric system. All jewelry people work in the metric system, and we don't really understand sometimes the whole system of the American system. Also, as an archaeologist, I work in the metric system. So here's the tentative layout. There's the graph paper, also in metric, and they can be bought anywhere. So there's the layout you see of the beginning of my bezel, and the little notches 2 millimeters apart. It's tedious, but also, you know, precise, and precision does bring beauty in this case. So as you can see now, I did my 2 millimeter cuts. See the 2 millimeter line on a 4 millimeter thick. So, and I used my little smaller saw with the thick blade that you saw earlier. This is a 6-inch sheet, 20 gauge. So I'm going to cut the bezel off now, and I stopped just a little bit short of my mark. This one 100 millimeters in length, because the stone comes out to about 110 millimeters, but I'll show you why. Because I like to have it in really precisely, but also you know, it helps me to save a little bit without wasting silver. So there we have it, the 4 millimeter wide bezel with the 2 millimeter notches all there. And I used my larger saw with the thinner blade as opposed to the smaller ones for the notch cuts. But you know, when you cut in 6 millimeter, 6-inch wide sheet, you need a lot of room for the back. And you know, with practice, and you can always cut on the line or next to it. This was in one shot, but you know, it takes a lot of practice. I've been doing this almost 30 years straight, so practice makes perfect. And we'll go along and fit the bezel now, and then I'll show you how it works even more. Thank you. So I did a test fitting of the bezel, and I'm quite satisfied with it. When it has the little notches and centers in it, it bends quite easily. I always try to start on a flat area, see where it starts and it'll end, because when you solder it together, it's a lot better rather than starting at the curved end of a stone or bezel. And as a reminder, always do your bezels with hard solder. That's how I was taught. So after I fitted, I put a little notch in the side where I can see it, and you can barely see it right there on top and in the side there. I was fortunate that it's ending pretty much precisely on one of my mark cuts. So you see how I measured at the beginning 110, so I'm just 2 millimeters off there. I said it was 110, it's actually 108 millimeters all the way around. So, you know, measuring like that really helps a lot, but also helps it come together really nicely and precisely in the end. And then, of course, if future bezel piece, this piece that's remaining I can use for a smaller stone. So, and again, it's 20 gauge sheet sterling silver, and you can kind of see how I put it together. And so I'll cut it and solder it and bring it back to you. So there you see the same bezel. I fitted it, and I'm ready to hard solder it. You can see the seam, and I use this material that I came up with. I call it Volcanic Ash Soldering, and if you're interested in it, look up Volcanic Ash Soldering or VAS on Google, or just ask me, let me know. It's really great stuff to solder in. I like how you can move it around and adjust it and bury things in it really easily. But it's long lasting. This is a Raku ceramic bowl that I found at a shop or a thrift store. Takes high heat. Anyway, if you're interested in some of this volcanic ash soldering for this, let me know, or Well, I soldered the bezel and let it cool. I don't submerge it in pickle right off the bat because that tempers it or makes it harder. I want it to be soft so I can put it back around the stone and let it shape and be a little bit malleable with hand. So again, I let it air cool on this volcanic ash soldering material that I have. Again, it's really nice. Like I was saying, you can really put it in there, shape it, move it around. It's great for rings and things, and best of all, it reflects heat. It doesn't absorb it, completely like a lot of materials or soldering directly on metal or bricks. So you use less oxygen acetylene gas, which is what I use to solder. And I use liquid flux. This is a little spray ball over it, Cuprinol. I buy a large gallon and keep refilling the same bottle that I've probably had for years. But I like liquid flux. You heat the piece, spray it, heat a little more, spray it, and it does really well. And it keeps this volcanic ash solder material I have in good condition. Also, I use an electronic igniter. It's just basic. I've had it for many years, so you can see it's rusted out, but that's all it does. Just a tiny little spark. I don't know if you can see it. I can't really see it, but it's enough to get the oxygen and acetylene going. It's well used, well worn. It's probably about 18 or 20 years old, but it works every time. I don't really like the traditional spark, starter, because it keeps having those little smoke flames or fumes, and this is fumeless. It doesn't require any batteries or anything. It's just basic, like little power on its own. So anyway, we'll continue on with this bezel. Oh, I have the bezel around the turquoise stone Royston here, and it's a pretty good fit. And to get it even better fit, I kind of just push it against the edge of my cutting piece here, and I just slightly go around it. It gives, and it's a good way to do it. But also, you see how where I put the bezel together here, it's a flat area. I was able to just push it in there, but imagine if you put the bezel together right here, it would be very hard. So I would have put it together up here, up here, up here on the other side. But the piece is going to sit like this, so I kind of want it off there. So as you can see, it came out very well. I got my edge. The stone was 6 millimeters thick, so it's going to sit really nicely. And the bezel is really, really snug. I mean, that's what you want. As you can see, barely any kind of space. Just a tiny bit there. I'll work that out so it sits really clean. But for all intents and purposes, it's still sitting real nice. I mean, look at it. It hasn't even... So you always want a really snug bezel. And again, it just takes practice. And I'm at a good spot now with this bezel. As you can see, I got it to fit snugly, but the stone just pretty much pops right out, which is a good thing, and then I can refit it back in there nicely. Not much pressure, it just fell right in. So that's a good thing with that. But also, before you saw this, I actually sanded the bottom, because it has to sit completely flush with it, and also cleans up real nice. And you can see when it's shiny, so you can see where it's sanded. And I use this 220 Matador high quality sandpaper. I'll let you look at the back there. Made in Germany, of course. Germany, Swiss people, they make a lot of precise, beautiful things. It's about $2 a sheet, but it's well worth it. You can see where I've worn down stones with it and things of that nature, but it lasts a long time. But also it takes water. You can just put it in under the water faucet and rinse it off and let it dry, and you're good to go again. So it's always good to have this high quality sandpaper, but it's not sand, it's from metal. So anyway, so I'll let this soak and pickle a little bit, and you can see it's perfect, almost ready to go and solder on, and we'll continue on. I got the bezel soldered on to my sterling silver back. I used a heat underneath method. I've always found it a lot easier and better for me. There are some drawbacks, but if you work them in, you can see that it works well. Mainly you have to have your piece solid on there so it doesn't rock back and forth. You know, I mean, it has to have full support all the way around, because any type of heat will melt, the piece will melt down, and then you'll have gaps. So you have to really make sure of that. And of course, we saw earlier the piece is flush. The bezel was sanded down. This is a underneath method again, or mesh method. This is I think it was a plant holder that I bought a long time ago, but it was all iron, and I got it from a thrift store. It works really well for me. I think they sell different ones, but I'll use it for a lot of different things. And so I put the heat from underneath, and it works really well. Sometimes, you have to apply a little heat on top too, real fast, if you have a really thick piece. So that's on that. And we can test now to see how good the stone fits. Perfect. See how it fits right in there? Snug. And that's how it should be. Barely any gaps. You can't even see them. And we'll see how it closes really well on it. And of course it falls wide out. So it's a good thing. Well, we'll move on now to the edge of the bezel. So you can see here now where I quit, at the beginning there, and allow a little piece to hang out so I can cut. And so I'll recut these now, and you can see the seam and the little tiny marks I have where they ended really well and exactly on the dot where I wanted to. So I'm going to finish these and then begin the process of cutting a little bit more, but more precise, and I'll get to that in a second. But I just wanted to show you how this ended, and from the beginning, and why I didn't cut all the way to the end. So I'm going to try to show you how I cut the edge. As you see, I have already started 3. I do want to let you know that, see the blade? It's just as thick as the silver, maybe not even this thick, but if you look at it there, it's about 20 gauge itself. So I'm using the teeth as a measurement. I want to bury this blade halfway in, which would be halfway there. So I'm using that as a gauge if it makes sense. And I'm doing this, I'm making sure, see, I have my previous notches are my guide. I'm making sure I'm straight. And I'm going real slow. you get, so see, I can see my teeth just like you can. I'm burying the teeth halfway down. See, I can barely see the teeth. It's a thick blade, so it's really aggressive, so you got to go like, you know, you can get it down to a number of strokes too, so if that helps you. Too much and you'll cut away the bezel, but you see how I did that? But normally I would do it like this, but you can't see it, so I'm fully supported. I'll take that, and I know it's straight. I can see it from the back side here. And I'll use that as my guide, see, and then once I got that like that, I'll clean it up. Again, using the blade as my depth gauge. See, once all the teeth disappear, I know I'm halfway through that metal, and I don't want to go any more than that. And you can see from the side too, the depth, just a little bit there. So I'm going to go all the way around on this. I hope you can understand that, and you know, it's pretty simple, but it's tedious, but at the same time, that's how you get a great bezel, a really custom look, you know, and that's how it's done. There we are. It took me about another 40 minutes to completely go around the whole piece, and you can see from the light here how it is. And basically what I like about this too is each one acts like a little prong to hold the stone, so when you go to tighten the stone on, you have to push each one in, and that's a really good plus. We'll show you that later, but basically I'm done, you know, showing you how this thing works here on this, but I'll show you in the end, and I have some plans for it. I do want to tell you that before I began the side cuts, I cleaned up the piece a little bit, cleaned up the bottom so it's even. You want to be at the point where you just do very little bit of removal after this, because you'll end up cutting these grooves down and lessening. I did pre-cut these before I soldered. I didn't show you that, but I wanted to have the piece go all the way around. You can see the solder kind of went up a little bit into the piece, but that's okay. But again, there's 3 little notches right there above the plate, those were pre-cut before I set the bezel soldered to the back of this silver plate. And I did put my maker's mark finally in the back. I like to put, sometimes when it's a big piece like this, I like to put the maker's mark in last, because the hitting action warps the silver sheet and causes it not to be straight. And again, remember how we said we want it to be flush. So, you know, this Royston turquoise is set in here, and everything looks okay. I'll keep going over it, and as you see, it fits really nicely in there. And that's the way it should be. Here I am pretty much done with this piece as far as the bezel showing. But as you can see, I also now darken the bezel, and again, it'll highlight those lines that we cut in. I use a brush, and liquid oxidizing or liver sulfur is also good, but I like the liquid oxidizing. It doesn't evaporate too quickly. And I warmed up the piece with the, you know, the torch to let it get in there. But also, before I did do the oxidizing, I do want to tell you something. Is I took my saw and I went through each little groove here, because anytime you have a bend like this and then on top, the little grooves they get smaller. So when you go to push them in against your stone to hold them, sometimes you might not have enough room, or the actual area gets too small. So I opened them up, and you can see why they would get smaller, because the curve is closing them up just a little bit. So I went through with my saw, and I put it back in there, and just lightly drew it one or twice across, and that really worked out. So, well, here's the final piece with Royston turquoise, a little distressed leather. That's the brown color distressed, and you can see I finished some little end caps for it, and that's what it'll hook on. But also, you noticed how I kept the top of the bezel flat, so it forms this frame. You can also file them down at an angle and give it a different look, but and you've probably seen that. But see how it frames it really nice? And so I've done that, and then you can see now the side of the bezel. It's pretty clear what I did, and everything you saw all around the top, and after the oxidation and cleaning it up, and that's how we ended up. And you saw how we did it, and if you have any questions, just let me know, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. And you can also look at my website at nathanlefthand.com, and I'm glad to share with you, and there it is.